correspondent Emma Birchley, who is outside the High Court for us there and brings some breaking news on the judgment in that case about Palestine Action. Emma.
So plenty of whooping and cheering here from supporters of Palestine Action outside the Royal Courts of Justice. Although it's not entirely clear at the moment whether it is a clear victory. We're being told that the claim by Huda Ammori has been allowed on 2 grounds but rejected on 2 others. So we're not entirely sure at the moment whether the ban is going to be lifted. But certainly here, quite a lot of delight. The cheering started as soon as I was getting that message out here that they certainly had won on at least 2 of the grounds, rejected on 2. So just got to wait and see whether that means that Palestine Action will no longer be a proscribed organisation or whether that will remain in place. Of course, being a proscribed organisation means you cannot be a member, you cannot show any support for that. Well, clearly they think the news is good. The cheering really going up a notch just then. And we have to remember that 2,500 to 3,000 people have been arrested since last summer for showing placards that usually say, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." So clearly in those places not violent in any way, but still deemed to be against the law simply because Palestine Action has been a proscribed organisation. So hopefully we'll get some clarity whether that ban has formally been lifted, but certainly the co-founder of the organisation winning on 2 counts. I'm getting some information now. So High Court rules ban on Palestine Action is unlawful and should be quashed in a landmark decision. And Palestine Action's co-founder, Huda Ammori, a statement coming from her saying, "This is a monumental victory both for our fundamental freedoms here in Britain and in the struggle for freedom for the Palestinian people, striking down a decision that will forever be remembered as one of the most extreme attacks on free speech in recent British history." Just very carefully reading that, but I think, yes, so it would sound like this has most definitely been quashed and Palestine Action will no longer be a proscribed organisation under the Terrorism Act of 2000.
OK, so some nuance there with that judgment, but certainly in terms of the main thing that Palestine Action were looking for, which is for that proscription as a terror group to be held to be unlawful, the jubilation behind you really reinforces that they certainly believe that they have won that. What does it mean, do we know, Emma, for the thousands of people who have been arrested? And do those arrests, do those convictions, do they end up being quashed now?
That's not clear at the moment. That might make sense, but we're waiting for confirmation. I have just had a message from my colleague who's in court saying it remains proscribed until a further order of the court. Having said that, I think it's unlikely that anyone holding up a banner saying "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action" will find themselves arrested as they had been at previous protests. For example, that one on September the 6th, where more than 850 people were arrested. The scale of those arrests was so huge that they had to set up temporary tents to process those arrests in Westminster. All sorts of people who've been sitting on the pavement, sitting on Parliament Square with their placards, all sorts of people from teachers to pensioners, army officers, a retired magistrate in her 80s, all sorts of people who were taking part in those protests silently with those placards, but arrested for that action. Now, we know that there have been placards. Oh, you can see them now. So the placards that we knew were here but hadn't been shown are now back on show here at the Royal Courts of Justice since that decision was made just a few minutes ago that Palestine Action, that ban, was unlawful and should be quashed in what is undoubtedly a landmark decision.
Yeah, it does get confusing, though, Emma, doesn't it? Because it also says on the wires here that the ban stays in place pending an appeal process.
Yeah, so, yes, they've won the ban. Ban stays in place until further order pending the appeal process. So, clearly, there's going to be an appeal. Clearly, the people are out with their banners still. I mean, I still think that probably less likely that they'll be arrested when we know that there has been this victory today here at the Royal Courts of Justice. But clearly, this isn't over yet. You know, the Home Office were very clear about this, that they felt it was the right decision to prescribe Palestine Action in the summer when Yvette Cooper, the then Home Secretary, was justifying this decision. She was saying this is not a non-violent organisation, that this ban needed to be in place. But really, the barristers in the hearing at the end of last year really pushing back against that, describing it as ill-considered, discriminatory, alien to the basic tradition, they said, of common law and the European Convention on Human Rights, and that simply this was a direct action civil disobedience organisation that did not advocate for violence. And so it was the first to be prescribed, an organisation like this to be prescribed. It was unlawful. They said it should be quashed. And certainly at court today it has been quashed. But if this appeal is underway is going to be forthcoming, then it appears that is why we are being told that the ban remains in place. The organisation will remain prescribed until a further court order.
OK, for now, Emma, thank you. That breaking news coming to us now from outside the High Court, which has just handed down its judgment that the government's ban on Palestine Action, its prescription of Palestine Action as a terrorist group, is unlawful. Important, though, to caveat that with the fact that the ban remains in place, we understand, until the appeals process has concluded. Welcome back. Just a recap for you of the breaking news this hour. The High Court has found that the government's decision to prescribe the group Palestine Action, a terror group, is unlawful. The ban, though, does remain in place while an appeals process is underway. There has been a response from the government, a statement which I can bring you now from the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. She writes, the court has acknowledged that Palestine Action has carried out acts of terrorism, celebrated those who have taken part in those acts and promoted the use of violence. It has also concluded that Palestine Action is not an ordinary protest or civil disobedience group, and that its actions are not consistent with democratic values and the rule of law. For those reasons, Shabana Mahmood, Home Secretary, continues, I am disappointed by the court's decision and disagree with the notion that banning this terrorist organisation is disproportionate. She concludes her statement by saying, I intend to fight this judgment in the Court of Appeal. Well, we can go back now to the Royal Courts of Justice and we can speak to legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg. Very good morning to you, Joshua. I know you can always make sense of these things for us. The big picture there, underscored by the jubilant celebrations by the protesters with their placards behind you, is that the government has been found unlawful in its move to prescribe the Palestine Action group. The Home Secretary intends to appeal, and that ban remains in place while that appeal process is underway. Just talk us through really where this judgment takes us, because it's a little more nuanced, isn't it, than it first appears?
You're quite right. Two of the grounds put forward by Palestine Action were rejected by the High Court this morning, but two were accepted. The two that were successful were that the decision by the former Home Secretary Yvette Cooper to seek an order proscribing, banning Palestine Action was made by the Home Secretary in breach of her own policy. And the second one on which they succeeded was that the decision to ban Palestine Action was contrary to the Human Rights Act, in particular Article 10, which guarantees freedom of expression, and Article 11, which allows freedom of association. But as you've said, and the court went to some lengths to stress this, because it was expected that the present Home Secretary would appeal, as indeed you've reported she is seeking to do, the ban remains in force, certainly until the question of an appeal is considered by the High Court, and probably, I think, until the case actually reaches the Court of Appeal and the Court of Appeal has the chance to reach a decision.
And would you explain to us, Joshua, how if the court has acknowledged, these in the words of the Home Secretary here, that Palestine Action has carried out acts of terrorism, how it is unlawful for it to be prescribed as a terror group?
In a word, there are restrictions on how you go about banning a group. Just because some of its members have, in the Home Secretary's words, carried out acts of terrorism, it doesn't follow that you are allowed to ban the entire group. Now, in a little bit more detail, the court concluded, this is the first ground on which Palestine Action was successful, the court concluded that the purpose of the then Home Secretary's policy she had to give her reasons for meaning that any person supporting Palestine Action should be prevented from doing so. She relied on the fact that banning Palestine Action would be advantageous because it would mean that the offences could be used against anybody who supported Palestine Action, and we've seen all these arrests, and that wasn't a sufficient ground for proscribing it. The second one was that it was disproportionate. A very small number of Palestine Action's activities amounted to acts of terrorism within the definition of Section 1 of the Terrorism Act, and those could be dealt with under the general criminal law. The nature and scale of Palestine Action's activities falling within the definition of terrorism had not yet reached the level, scale and persistence to warrant proscription.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the cheers from the people there gathered behind you. I can't see any placards out now. We thought that there might be. I can't see any there from the limited view that I've got. Is that because they have been made aware that that ban remains in place until the appeals process has concluded?
There is a very heavy police presence here. There were police officers inside the court building. There's a police officer just here to my right who has a camera, who is clearly taking pictures of the protesters to see if anybody holds up a banned sign. And as you say, I don't see any sign of that happening. So you're absolutely right that people are being cautious. Equally, the police are very well prepared to deal with any breach of the law. And what the senior judge, Dame Victoria Sharp, President of the King's Bench Division, said was the proscription order remains in force until further order of the court. It remains an offence to belong to or profess to belong to Palestine Action, subject to various defences. It remains an offence to invite support for Palestine Action, to express an opinion or belief that is supportive of Palestine Action, to manage a meeting at which one knows Palestine Action is going to be part of, and to address a meeting to encourage support for Palestine Action. Those all remain offences, even though the court has said that the ban was unlawful, and that is, as you've been explaining, to allow time for the Home Secretary to appeal.
And how long do you think that process will take?
Well, certainly weeks. We know that the Palestine Action lawyers have been given to the 20th of February to give an indication of what they want to do. In particular, there's a question of the precise order of the court. The court has directed the parties to provide written submissions by the 20th of February on the terms of the order that should be made in the light of the judgment. There were lawyers in court for Palestine Action, but they weren't invited to say anything because they obviously needed to take instructions from their clients and consider the situation. And that's when Dame Victoria Sharp said Palestine Action remains proscribed until further order of the court, because the court has yet to hear argument on whether there should be any stay of any order setting aside the prescription order pending the possibility of an appeal. Now, what that means is the first thing that has to happen is you have to hear whether the Home Secretary is going to appeal. Well, she said she will. The next thing that has to happen is drawing up a formal order setting out the consequences of what happened today. The next thing is that the question is whether there should be a temporary stay of the order, meaning the order allowing Palestine Action to be deproscribed should be suspended, pending the possibility of an appeal. I suppose we'll hear something about that next month, and Palestine Action will argue we've won our case, therefore the order should be lifted immediately. The Home Secretary will say, well, look, I'm appealing. The Court of Appeal could overturn this decision today, therefore the ban should stay in force.
All right, Joshua, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. I think we're going to be speaking to you again throughout the programme. Thank you for now.